Hi everybody, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur, and I hope that you're doing well. I hope you're having a great start to this weekend. We're a quarter of the way into Njál Saga for Sagalong 2021, and I hope that you're enjoying the reading experience. I certainly am. The narrative is moving, it's exciting. The body count is rising, particularly in these last several chapters as we move through multiple cycles of a revenge feud or a blood feud that's ostensibly between the households of Gunnar and Njál, but that's really instigated and perpetuated by Hallgerd, who is married to Gunnar, and Bergthora, who's married to Njál. So it's becoming quite a violent saga, but I'm really enjoying it. I'm discovering why different readers or critics or historians have identified Njál Saga as the crown jewel of the Icelandic sagas. It's such an immersive reading experience. There are so many details about 10th century Iceland that are just naturally woven into the story. I haven't felt that there have been these exposition dumps in the saga, and so I'm really enjoying it. But I think the real strength of the saga in my reading so far has been the number of distinct and individual personalities that have emerged, and that's really what has drawn my attention and drawn me deeper into reading the Njál Saga. Is just how many different people seem to exist here. They don't feel two-dimensional. They don't feel as that they're just pure archetypes. They really feel well-rounded. They seem to have a sense of agency and a real sense of personality, and I'm really enjoying that. We have Njál, of course, who we're not introduced to for the first 20 chapters, and he seems to be this individual who is recognizing a shortcoming that exists within his culture. He seems to recognize very much that this cycle of revenge is going to lead to destruction for everyone involved, and he would just like to stop it. He doesn't see, it's not necessarily an aversion of violence, it's just a recognition of how destructive the violence ultimately will become, and he's willing to just end these. He has a deep knowledge of the law, and he has some foresight. Then we have Gunnar, who views Njál as a mentor in some ways. He's willing to ask for advice from Njál, and it seems to be more than willing to also settle the debt, call off the cycle of revenge. Yet when we meet Gunnar, he is a man of action, a man of violence. He's taking revenge. He is going in and he's going on raiding parties, and he's at the center of what might be the best action set piece in the first 40 chapters. We have Hrut, who is Hallgerd's uncle, and Hallgerd's married to Gunnar. And Hrut is impossible to pigeonhole. He might be the most fascinating character. He is a warrior. He is a lover in some ways. He acts as almost a prophet, where he can just see the dark futures that exist through different characters, including his niece Hallgerd. That's what we start with in chapter 1. And yet, Hrut is at the butt of the joke for the first 10 chapters, where, despite being a man who we've seen is a man of courage and action and a lover to the queen mother in Norway, and can't consummate his marriage to Un back in Iceland. And so there's what's going on with Hrut. And then of course we have Hallgerd, who, while seeming to very much keeps the wheel spinning on that cycle of revenge, she also has some agency. Her first marriage is a disaster, in part because she feels that she has no choice, she has no agency within it. And so we have so many different, really distinct individuals who are populating the saga, and I'm really enjoying that. Some details that I'm also enjoying. As I mentioned, it's such an immersive reading experience in terms of understanding medieval Iceland and understanding that this is pre-Christian Iceland. And so there are some differences in terms of how, Njál Saga was written after Christianity had been introduced onto the island, and so many of the inhabitants had become Christians. But it's set at a time before that, and there seems to be this. We're not being hit over the head with the differences that might exist between the culture of when it was written and the culture that it is set during. But the writer does seem to want to show us that this is a vibrant culture, it's a living culture. There's many people who are here and interact with each other, but also it's distant enough to be willing to explore some of the shortcomings that exist, and to be willing to allow us as readers to interrogate those to a certain degree. And so I'm really enjoying that. We see a critical distinction, again, one that we're not hit over the head with, but a critical distinction is that there is no central authority, there's no king or queen of Iceland. There is in Norway, and the trips certain characters take over to Norway reveal that to us across the sea. But there's no king in Iceland, kind of like the refrain in the book of Judges from the Hebrew Bible or the Christian Old Testament. There was no, in those days there was no king in Israel. Well, in these days there's no king in Iceland. There is an annual council where they can gather together and they'll recite a third of the law. There are people who are sort of regarded as priests, but they're really priest judges who just implement that law that is, recited for everybody. They implement and make decisions on those laws. People can be declared outlaws, literally outside of the law. They're no longer protected, and someone can kill them. Someone who, we've noticed several characters in the revenge cycle, they have to go tell the other household, hey, I'm the one who, killed Atli. I'm the one who, and that's because if they try to hide it, that's a much more that's even more against the law, a greater transgression against the law than the revenge cycle. And so we're discovering that. We're seeing how the marriages exist, that divorce can exist. We also have, I believe it's Thrain, who might be the single worst character Thrain in chapter 34 might be the single worst character. In about one page, he is in front of his wife, ogling a young woman. She calls him on it. He then jumps on the table in front of witnesses, demands that he divorce her, and then proposes marriage to the woman he was just, leering at. And they discuss, well, he's wealthy, it's okay. So there are women who are distinct characters, but we very much see that this is a society where the men are the one who make the laws, the men are the one who make so many of these decisions. But that tug and pull between how women are finding their power, how they're finding their agency, both within their marriages and within that cycle of revenge, has been really interesting so far. Now, I did want to read a couple of just sections and then a couple of quotes that I thought were comical. So I had mentioned that Gunnar's at the center of maybe the best action set piece. So this was in chapter 30. They made ready on board their ships. The Viking ships drew apart to each side, making a lane between them. Gunnar headed straight through it. Vandal seized a grappling hook and hurled it across into Gunnar's ship, then closed at once. Gunnar drew his sword. It was a fine weapon that Ulfr had given him, and without pausing to put on his helmet, he jumped onto the prow of Vandal's ship and cut down the first man he met. Meanwhile, Karl had laid his ship against Gunnar's on the other side, and now he hurled a spear directly across it, aiming at Gunnar's waist. Gunnar saw the spear coming, whirled round faster than the eye could follow, caught the spear in flight with his left hand, and hurled it back at Karl's ship. The man who was in its way fell dead. Kolskeg took hold of an anchor and heaved it into Karl's ship. One of the flukes smashed through the hull, and the dark blue sea came pouring in. The crew had to scramble off their vessel into the other ships. Gunnar now leapt back to his own ship, and Halvard drew alongside him. A tremendous battle developed. The men had seen their leader's courage, and each one fought as hard as he could. Gunnar laid about him, hacking and hurling, killing men on all sides, and Kolskeg gave him brave support. Karl had joined his brother Vandal on the ship, and there they fought side by side all day. At one stage, Kolskeg was taking a rest aboard Gunnar's ship. Gunnar noticed this and said to him, "You have been kinder to others than to yourself today, for you have quenched their thirst forever." Kolskeg took a bowl full of mead, drained it, and returned to the fight. So, like I said, there are sections of this saga that move. But as I said, we also get these eerie, very dark prophecies. Hrut can act almost as like Tiresias in some of the Greek tragedies. Hoskold asked Hrut, "What do you think of her? Do you not think she is beautiful?" referring to his daughter Hogard. Hrut made no reply. Hoskold repeated the question. Then Hrut said, "The child is beautiful enough, and many will suffer for her beauty. But I cannot imagine how thieves' eyes have come into our kin." Which is pretty dark. And then we have the various aspects where Njál's son Skarphedin is starting to emerge as kind of he and Njál has an interesting relationship where he sort of just comes in and says what's on his mind in a very dry, phlegmatic sense of humor. So we have Skarphedin saying, "Hogard does not let our servants die of old age," as people are being killed in the revenge feud. We have a bit where he sort of just come by with the blood money and toss it. But Skarphedin is saying, The man must have been double doomed to die at the hand of our foster father, who had never before seen bloodshed. Most people would have expected us brothers to be first to have done this, knowing our temperament. Your turn will come soon, said Njal, and even then it will only be because you are driven to it. And we see this sense of Njal. He's in a very weird way, and this is from a 20th century guy who grew up in the US perspective. Njal is emerging almost as like the Godfather. He doesn't want to commit violence. He's trying to restrain violence within his own family, particularly with his sons. He's not having his sons, take on the blood feud. And as we meet him initially, he's going through these very descriptive details. Okay, here's what you're going to do to get this divorce claim. You've got to dress this way and say these things and take these people with you. Say it so only they can hear it. And so he really understands all these ways of here's how far we can bend the system. Here's how far we can, push the system. Here's what people will accept. And this is the only way it can be done. And so he's really, really interesting. But one other piece I wanted to identify real quick, and then I'll just, say, here's a couple of other works that so far I'm reminded of, is the tiny introductions of sort of the supernatural and of magic that have come in. So we have really two distinct components. One is a halberd, a weapon that was charmed, and that was sort of, magical, and that a character was able to defend against that and now has that. And then the other was at the very beginning where Queen Gunnhild is disappointed that Hrut is going to leave because he has a woman he loves in Iceland and he's lied to her about that. I want to give you this gold bracelet, she said when they were alone, and clasped it round his arm. You have given me many good gifts, said Hrut. And if you've read the first 40 chapters, you know what those gifts include. She put her arms round his neck and kissed him and said, if I have as much power over you as I think, the spell I now lay on you will prevent your ever enjoying the woman in Iceland on whom you have set your heart. With other women you may have your will, but never with her. And now you must suffer as well as I, since you did not trust me with the truth. So, Queen Gunnhild, don't lie. But again, this has really been an enjoyable reading experience. I'm certainly looking forward to the next 40 chapters. Some works, of course, that I'm reminded of. Well, the other Icelandic sagas, particularly, I would say, I'm enjoying this so much more than Eagle's Saga, but the Saga of Gunnlaug's Serpent Tongue has some aspects where there are feuds, and there is, the feuds kind of are juxtaposed with romance, and I'm seeing that in Njál's Saga so far. I've really enjoyed both. The aspects of marriage and the ways in which the marriages occur, and whether they're good marriages or bad marriages, remind me to a certain degree of those described in the book of Genesis, including Judah's sons marrying Tamar. If you don't know what I'm talking about, try reading Genesis. Check out that chapter. And Thomas Mann and Joseph and his brothers, certainly discuss those at length. There's also an element, I put this up in the Voxer we've got going, but with all the weird marriages and the weird little family squabbles and stuff, I'm reminded a little bit of some of Jane Austen's works like Pride and Prejudice. Obviously they're very, very different, they're very, very distinct, but Njál Saga feels like a novel in some ways, and the drama feels relevant. In terms of other sort of texts, the Poetic Edda sort of give a window not so much into the sagas, but into what some of the beliefs or songs might have been that the individuals within the sagas would have been aware of, so the Poetic Eddas. There's aspects of the saga from a historical perspective that feel like, Suetonius and the 12 Caesars, or Livy, perhaps, where we're getting some historical events, but we understand it's not exactly what happened, it's not exactly what was said. In terms of fiction, Frans Benston has The Long Ships, and set about 100 years before Njál's Saga and a number of the other sagas would be the Saxon stories of Bernard Cornwell, The Last Kingdom, The Pale Horseman, Sword Song, Lords of the North. And the last connection would be there are aspects of Njál's Saga so far that feel somewhat similar to King Lear, particularly with Njál as sort of a type of King Lear, and Hallgerd almost as an Edmund. So I'm curious to keep reading and see if I continue to see that connection. But again, I hope that you're enjoying Njál Saga. I hope that you're having a great weekend. Let me know which characters you're finding really interesting so far. And I'll see you next week.